So let's talk about the creation of the Darks Luminosity Masks. In order to do that, we need to go to the Channel tab to select and load the RGB channel with Ctrl or Command and click. Once we select the channel, this time we need to invert this selection, because when we select the RGB channel, we are selecting all the lights in the scene, but we want to select the darks in the scene, and in order to do that, we need to invert this selection. We use the key combination of Ctrl, Shift and I, or Command, Shift and I if you are using the Mac. In this way, we invert the selection. As you can see, the marching hands change. We save the selection with this button, and in this way we created the first dark luminosity mask. I renamed that in Darks 1. Now, how this mask works? As I explained it you in the previous tutorial, a classical layer mask in Photoshop works with white and black, and all that is white is 100% selected. Instead, all that is black is not selected at all. But because luminosity masks are very sophisticated selection, here we have also some tones which are gray in the mask, because this mask is self-feathered. So we have some transition between white and black, transitions which are created according to the light present in the scene. And that's the real difference with a normal layer mask in Photoshop. I realized that I just said something wrong, because when you create a layer mask in Photoshop, you can paint when using the brush tool with an opacity which is lower to 100%. When you paint with white at an opacity which is lower to 100%, you are painting with gray, not with white. So in a classical layer mask, when you use the brush tool, in effect you can paint also with gray. But the real difference with a luminosity mask is that this gray is generated according to the real light in the scene. And when we paint a normal layer mask, we can paint with gray, but it's something that we do according to personal taste and sensibility, but we are not selecting something using and considering the real light which is present in the scene, and which in the luminosity mask creates the grays, which are the transitions between the whites and the blacks, or to better say, between the light and the darks in the image. Now I create a curve adjustment layer with this Darks luminosity mask attached on that, and to do that, with the selection still active, because as you can see the marching hands are present, I go to the Layers tab, and with this button I create a curves adjustment layer. Now if I modify the midtone point of this curve and I drag it up or down, I change the overall exposure of this image. If I bring it up, I make the image brighter. If I bring it down, I make the image darker. And because we are using the Darks luminosity mask attached to this curves adjustment, the parts which are affected by these adjustments are just the darks of this image. Remember, all that is white is 100% selected, all that is black is not selected and not affected at all by the adjustment. So when I bring down the exposure of this image, all the parts which in the mask are white, they become darker, because this is a pretty wide luminosity mask selection, and this particular image is pretty dark. We have the impression that all the image is becoming darker, but if you look at this portion of the sky, it doesn't change at all, because it's protected by the mask. Instead, all the rest of the image, such as the St. Peter Basilica, the bridge, the cityscape, as well as the sky, they are affected by the mask because they are the darkest part of this image. And so this portion will be affected at 100% because it's completely white in the mask, and this portion of the sky will be affected a little bit less because it's gray and not white. Now let's keep creating the other Darks Luminosity Masks. I go back to the channel tab and I start by selecting the Darks 1 Luminosity Mask again. I use the key combination of Ctrl or Command click if you're using Mac. The marching hands appear, and now, as we did for the Lights Luminosity Mask, we need to intersect this channel with the Darks 1 Luminosity Mask, and to do that we use the key combination of Ctrl, Shift, Alt and click, or Command, Shift, Alt and click if you're using the Mac. The marching hands change, and in this way we have created the Darks 2 Luminosity Mask. In order to see that, we use this button to save the new channel. It's a more restricted mask, as you can see, because targets the parts which are even darker compared to the first Darks Luminosity Mask. I change its name to Darks 2, and now I keep creating all the other luminosity masks for the Darks. So with this selection still active, I use the key combination of Ctrl, Shift, Alt or Command, Shift, Alt and click on the same channel, which is this time is the Darks 2. The marching hands change, and now we can save the Darks 3 Luminosity Mask. And then with the selection still active, I use the same key combination on this new channel in order to create the Darks 4 mask. So again, Ctrl, Shift, Alt or Command, Shift, Alt and click. The marching hands change again. I save this new selection, and we created the Darks 4 Luminosity Mask. I continue by creating just a last luminosity mask for the Darks. So on this new channel, again Ctrl, Shift, Alt or Command, Shift, Alt and click. This warning message appears. We ignore that. The selection is always active, and we save this new channel, which is the Darks 5 Luminosity Mask channel. Now I can rename those new channels. This one is the Darks 3, this the Darks 4, and this last one the Darks 5. Now let's create another curves adjustment layer with one of those new masks attached to that to see how the image changes and this time I will choose the Darks for Luminosity Mask. I load that with Ctrl or Command and click. Then I go in the Layers tab and I create again a curves adjustment layer. I change always the midtone of this curve to bring up or down the overall exposure of this image. And this time, as you can see, because this is a pretty restricted mask, the parts that change in this image are really the darkest, because this is a Darks for Luminosity Mask. So the sky remains pretty much the same, as well as the water. Instead, the St. Peter Basilica, the bridge, the trees, and just a little bit this portion of the sky become darker, and they get a much better contrast. I want to show you the same adjustment without the luminosity mask attached to this curve adjustment. I use Shift and click on the mask, and in this way I'm hiding the mask, and this is the same adjustment with the same curves without the luminosity mask attached to that. As you can see, it's pretty strong. It's not good as the adjustment with the Darks for Luminosity Masks, because here the mask is affecting just the darkest part of this image, and without the mask we are bringing down the exposure of the whole image. Okay, now it's time to create all the Midtones Luminosity Masks. To speed up the process, I've already created again all the lights and the Darks Luminosity Masks. So now to create the Midtones Luminosity Masks, we need first of all to select the whole image with Ctrl or Command if you're using Mac and A. So in this way, you see, we selected all the image, not the RGB channel, but the whole image. And once we select the whole image, we need to subtract to this selection the lights one and the darks one in order to create the first midtone luminosity mask. Let's do that. To subtract the lights one, I use the key combination of Ctrl, Alt and click, or Command, Alt and click if you're using Mac. And then I subtract the darks one. Again, Ctrl or Command, Alt and click. It appears this warning message, but we can ignore that with OK, and then I save the selection. And this mask represents the first midtone luminosity mask. I rename it in Midtones 1. So how this luminosity masks works, it's selecting the first midtones in the photograph. So it's targeting not the white and the blacks, but just the midtones. And this is a pretty basic midtones mask selection. And I think this first one is not very useful to do any kind of adjustment, because it's targeting too few the midtones. So I keep creating the next Midtones 2 luminosity mask, because it's a pretty good selection to increase the contrast and the clarity of our image. To do that, the first thing we do, we deselect the active selection with Ctrl and D or Command and D. Then I select again the whole image with Ctrl or Command and A. The marching hand appears. And now I subtract the lights 2 and the darks 2 in order to create the Midtones 2 luminosity mask. So Ctrl, Alt or Command Alt and click on lights 2 channel, and then Ctrl, Alt or Command and Alt and click on darks 2. The marching hands change. We save the selection and we generate the Midtones 2 luminosity mask. I create just a last Midtones mask, and then, as I did with the lights and the darks luminosity masks, I will show you an example using an adjustment layer and a Midtones luminosity mask attached to that, to see how this adjustment affects the overall image. Okay, so let's create just the Midtones 3 luminosity masks before. So I deselect the active selection with Ctrl D or Command D. I select again the whole image with Ctrl A, and this time I subtract to this selection the lights 3 luminosity mask and the darks 3 luminosity mask. So Ctrl, Alt and click, or Command Alt and click if you're using Mac, and then the same key combination on the darks 3. We save this new luminosity masks, which is the Midtones 3 luminosity mask channel. So as you can see, we started from the first Midtones channel. I created mask until the Midtones 3, and as you can see, the more we keep creating mask, the more we are selecting a wide range of midtones. So in the first one, the midtones were less selected, and in this third mask we selected a lot of the midtones in the image. Now I select the Midtones 2 luminosity mask with Ctrl or Command and click. Then I go to the Layers tab and I create a new curves adjustment. This new curves adjustment has the Midtones 2 luminosity mask attached. If you want to reveal the content of the layer mask, just hit Alt and click on that. And as you can see, this is the Midtones 2 luminosity mask. I hide that again with Alt and click. And now if I change the midtone point of this curve to bring up or down the overall exposure of this image, the tones which are affected by this curves adjustment are just the midtones. So this adjustment doesn't touch at all the whites in the image as well as the darks. As you can see, the whites in the sky remains the same, and also the darks. So in this way, when you bring up or bring down the contrast of your image, you are sure that you are not blowing up the highlights, or you are not losing details in the darks, which is really important especially in landscape photography. It's really important to preserve all the details in the darks and in the whites in the photograph. So I create another curve, this time an S curve, to really bring up the contrast of this image and to show you that the darks and the whites remains the same. So I change this curve and I create an S shape, and as you can see, the contrast, it's really amazing right now. But the darks are preserved a lot, as well as the lights. I'm talking about the bright lights and the darkest darks. If I hide this layer mask to show you the same adjustment without that, you will see that the darks become too dark and the lights become too light. I will show you that. This is the same adjustment, but without the Midtones Luminosity Mask attached to that. And as you can see, the whites right now are two whites are blowing out, as well as the darks are two darks, and we are losing a lot of details in the darks before and after with the curves adjustment layer without the layer mask, and before and after but with the Midtones Luminosity Mask attached to that. As you can see, the adjustment is so subtle and really targets the midtones, so we can boost the contrast, but we are maintaining the details in the darks and in the lights. That's the real power of the Midtones Luminosity Mask. They allow us to boost the contrast and at the same time to preserve the details in the darks and in the whites. I think I stop here with this tutorial now to create the luminosity masks. Now I will show you just how to install the Photoshop action I created for you, and with which you can create all these masks pretty easily just by clicking on the play button. Once you download the action, you click on that and the action will appear in the action tab. If your action tab is not visible, to show that on Photoshop you need to go to Window and then to select Actions. You have two possibilities. You can either create all the lights masked together, all the darks channels together, and all the midtones channels together, or you can create every single mask at a time. So if you want, for example, to create the lights tree, you hit on lights tree, then the play button. If you go in the channels tab, you have the lights tree generated for you. So I delete all the mask I created for the tutorial. I delete also this last lights tree channel I just created. And I want to show you how to create all the lights channels together, just by selecting this option that says all the lights channels. So I press the play button, and in this way the Photoshop action I created for you generates all the lights luminosity masks together. You can do the same if you want to create all the darks channels together. So you select this option, then you press again the play button, and the action creates for you all the darks masks together. As you can see, you have darks 1, darks 2, darks 3, darks 4, and darks 5. And finally, if you want to create all the midtones channels at once, hit play on this last option which says all Midtones channels. And the action creates for you all the Midtones Luminosity Masks together. Okay, that's all for this tutorial. I remind you that if you desire to deepen your knowledge on how to use these masks, or in general on post-processing techniques, I offer some lesson via Skype, during which I will share with you my monitor and I will explain in depth the techniques I use to post-process my images, answering to all of your questions and curiosities. And I do also some photography tours in Rome, where as in a workshop I bring you to the most iconic and interesting places of the city, and I explain you how I capture the photograph, teaching my method to do that. Okay, thank you for watching this video until the end. I hope that it will help you with your photography, and see you in the next one. I wish you a nice day.